My name is Narela. I'm the coordinator for the Latin America Solidarity Center. We're an organization uh, paired in partnership with Aid Ireland. And during this webinar, we will be recording same live, and uh, everyone can access these events live.
Muy bien. Y quería contarles un poco de
I would
nuestra
like to talk to you about our organization, who we are, and what we do.
somos una pequeña ONG
We are
basada
a small NGO based in Ireland who promotes history, culture, and the issues of Latin America from a colonial point of view, and to prove the connections that exist between Ireland and Latin America.
esta serie de proyectos los llamamos los LASC Wednesday, los miércoles
We
de
call these
historia, y
projects
una vez al mes
LASC
celebramos
Wednesdays,
seminarios
and
en vivo
every
de
month
distinto
we do live
diferentes
webinars such
temáticas
as this
que
one to
estamos viviendo
raise awareness on issues
alrededor de América Latina y cuáles son los
related
efectos
to Latin America and their possible
Así como
connections
general vamos a
to
estar
Ireland.
viendo la
Today,
problemática
we'll be talking
de los
about
ZEDEs en
the
Honduras,
problem with ZEDEs in Honduras.
fuertes conexiones ya que
This
LASC ha
has
sido un
some
país
strong
colonial
connections with
con
Ireland,
ciudades como el Llano
since
Atlántico en su momento,
there's also
con
been
zonas
areas
económicas
such
de
as
desarrollo económico
Shannon
exclusivo y
in
queremos
Ireland,
demostrar
which
cómo
were
este tipo de
special economic zones, and we would
diferentes
like
formas y
to
abordajes jurídicos
explain
que
how
existen
these
en ciudades
ways
distintas
of
del mundo, los efectos que
managing
generan de forma distinta
cities around the
y
world have
consecuencias
different
para las
consequences
diferentes sociedades que justo no
for the
tienen
different
que ocurre en América
societies
Latina,
around
un
the
país
world.
particularmente como Honduras, que la
This happens in
oportunidad
Latin
de
America, in
este tipo de
Honduras,
proyectos
namely,
generaría
and
una oportunidad.
um, the
Entonces,
situation is similar to
vamos a
what it
arrancar
was in Ireland back in the
decirles un poco
day.
más qué estamos
I
haciendo
hope
desde
you'll found
Honduras
your channel.
y decirles
We
que
were
realmente
we
esta serie
really
de proyectos
appreciate
de
you joining
historia
us,
son posibles
and
gracias al
these
apoyo
uh,
del gobierno de
projects and
Irlanda,
events
quien
are
financia
possible
este proyecto
thanks to the
financia
government of
buena
Ireland.
parte de nuestros proyectos, a lo mismo que los miembros de
The
nuestra
government of
organización
Ireland is funding these projects
permiten que sigan
uh,
funcionando
and
y que sigamos
allows
teniendo
that
frutos ricos y buenos.
we
Gracias a
can
todos por
have
estar,
this type of
gracias a todos por haber
events.
participado también.
Thank you all
Y
for
voy a pasar
joining
la
us,
palabra
and
a Evan, nuestro partner en esta
pass on
organización, para
I will
que
give the
nos
floor
cuente. Muchas
to
gracias.
Evan, our partner today. Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Nareda, for the introduction. My name is Evan O'Reilly, and I am the coordinator of Peace Brigades International Ireland, or PBI Ireland. I'm just going to share my screen a little bit so I can tell you a little bit about who we are quickly with a bit of a visual aid. So Peace Brigade International is actually celebrating, or recently celebrated, its 40th anniversary. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we weren't able to really take part in that. So we'll be doing our 40th anniversary on our 41st anniversary. So it's a good time to get involved and to see the kind of work that we're doing. Peace Brigade International is a global organization, a headquarters in Brussels, but also field projects around the world. You can see in the map here, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Colombia, and then also some more projects that focus more on advocacy in Nepal, Kenya, and Indonesia. We have a few core principles, which are nonviolence, nonpartisanship, an international character, and horizontality. So what we do is we support human rights offenders, always with an invitation from human rights offenders to kind of keep in line with our principles. And we support human rights offenders through various ways. I think the most visual one, I can see in the picture in the screen here, is physically accompanying human rights offenders during activities that may pose some sort of risk. We also accompany through advocacy. We also use communications to amplify the struggles of the human rights offenders, and we also provide capacity building and training. PBI Ireland is one of 13 country groups that help support these field projects. We're very happy to do so. So in PBI Ireland, our focus would be on advocacy with the Irish government, with the Department of Foreign Affairs and different bodies that have an interest in human rights. We also conduct public events and speaker tours. We also have peace education and a few communications and advocacy actions that can help support, even from a distance, from Ireland, the struggles that are going on in Latin America in particular, but then also the other countries, Nepal, Kenya, and Indonesia. I'm really excited to be here today talking about Honduras, because I was actually a volunteer in Honduras recently. It was a really lovely experience, and I'd highly recommend it. So I'm really glad to hear from Christopher, from ARCAH in Honduras, from Beth, and then also Rebecca. I'll pass the floor over to Rebecca now to explain a little bit more about what the ZEDEs are. And I'll also leave a little bit of information in the chat on how you can get involved with PBI and some links that might be of interest. Thanks.
Muchas gracias, Evan.
Thank you very much, Evan. My name is Rebecca Sandoval. I'm from Honduras, and I am a social activist in my country. I'm now based in Ireland.
Mi carrera principal es marketing y
My
negocios
career
y audiovisuales.
consists in
Actualmente
marketing
colaboro con
and
LASC,
visual arts.
ya que me han
I'm now a
dejado
collaborator with LASC,
mostrar los temas de
and they
interés de
have
mi
given me
país.
the
Ese es el
opportunity to
tema
show these
del cual yo propuse hablar el
topics
día de hoy
related to
para
my country.
Latin American
I really
Solidarity Center
appreciate Latin America's
básicamente
Solidarity Center for this opportunity.
brindarnos el espacio y su solidaridad para poder compartir
We
esta
appreciate them
información que
for
está
giving
ocurriendo
us
en
the
Honduras.
platform to share what's going on in
A continuación
Honduras.
compartiré mi pantalla para mostrarles
I will now share my
más de cerca
screen
de Honduras y el
to show you
motivo
more about
de mi
Honduras
presencia en las sedes en sí.
and what the cities are about.
Espero que lo puedan ver.
I hope
Las
you can
sedes,
see it.
en sus siglas, significa zonas de empleo y desarrollo
Well, the
económico.
cities acronym means Zones for Employment and Economic
Honduras es un
Development.
país tropical
Honduras
en Centroamérica
is a tropical country located in Central America.
y su idioma principal o su
Its
idioma oficial es el español
official language is Spanish.
y hay aproximadamente 9 millones de
They have a
personas
population
viviendo en
of around 9 million
La
inhabitants.
importancia de Honduras es porque geográficamente es muy estratégico.
Honduras
Como pueden
has
ver,
a
tenemos
geographical
parte
importance,
de la costa
as you can see here,
en el
to
Mar
parts
Caribe y también
of they have
en
a
el sur lo
coast
que
in
es el
the
Océano
Caribbean
Pacífico.
Sea and down south the Pacific Ocean.
Honduras es un país multiétnico, tiene
Honduras is an ethnically diverse
cuatro grupos
country. They
étnicos
have four
que se
major
dicen
ethnic groups:
indígenas, garífunas, que
mestizos,
son
indigenous,
afrodescendientes,
Garifuna,
y
and
criollos
English
angloparlantes, que son
speaking
personas que viven
Creoles, which are people that
o que están prácticamente situadas en lo que es Islas de la Bahía
reside
y la
in the
parte
Isla de la Bahía Bay Islands
sur
area
del país.
and also up north in the north coast of the
Ahora, ¿qué
country.
son las sedes?
So
Las
what
sedes
are cities?
en sus
Well,
siglas son
cities
empleo y desarrollo
are
económico,
zones
son
for
área
employment and economic
nacional,
development,
ciudades,
are in national
ciudades
territory, and
industriales.
they're
Las
just
ciudades son
industrial
lugares que
cities
rigen especialmente
bound
los
to special
inversionistas.
regulations.
Esta área laboral
Investors would
de política
oversee
fiscal, judicial,
taxation,
económico y
law,
administrativo de esas
economy, and
ciudades.
administration of
Las
those
sedes,
cities.
o por lo menos así lo ha venido a vender el gobierno,
The cities
es un modelo
mirror
económico similar
the
a lo que es, por
economic
ejemplo,
model
Singapur,
of the
Shenzhen
one that
y
Hong Kong,
Shannon
Shenzhen,
en Irlanda.
or Singapore had,
¿Cómo
and
nació
likewise
Honduras?
Shannon in Ireland.
Pues en Honduras
So how did
todo
everything start in Ireland?
del golpe de
Well,
Estado de
around 9 years
2001,
ago, a delegation,
a partir de allí cuando ya
there
se
was a
intentó lo que es
coup
la
in
institucionalidad en el país,
Honduras,
dio
and
la entrada
uh,
o la puerta abierta para que las
that
personas pudieran, por
led
así decirlo,
people, foreign people, to experiment in the country with alternative economic models. 10 years ago, a group of foreign economists came into the country and they proposed this new model of the ZEDEs. The then president was Juan Orlando Hernandez. They tried to pass the law of the ZEDEs in 2012, but the Congress of Honduras deemed this illegal because it goes against national sovereignty. They didn't pass the law then, but and the 5 magistrates that voted against the law were fired. Alternative judges were hired to replace the ones that were fired. That happened in 2012. Then in 2013, the organic law of the city was passed. This was under the 120 2013 decree, and it was ratified in January 2014. The local communities started to protest and to condemn the ZEDEs. They felt their right to sovereignty was being undermined. Descendants of Africans and indigenous people felt that their rights were being undermined. Right now, 7 areas of the country are candidates to hosting ZEDEs. In 3 of them, there's already people who have acquired areas of land. These areas include the ZEDE Próspera in Roatán. In Choloma, you can find Orquídea, another city. You can find the city Morazán in Choloma, and you can also find a new city called Mariposa, but it can also only be found on the website. Their location has not been revealed yet. Now, I will present to you, I will introduce rather the experts on the topic. Beth Giglia, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She's an anthropologist and she is involved in the process of the cities, and she works for human rights issues. She's also a translator, an interpreter, and a visual artist. So I would like you to introduce yourself and to let us know what the framework of the ZEDEs is for you. What was your experience with that? Why do you think it's a violation of national sovereignty, and why is it unconstitutional?
You're muted, Beth. Sorry to bother you, but you're muted.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much to the organizers for the invitation to be here. I'm going to be speaking in English, so I hope that everyone can hear the interpretation in Spanish. As Rebecca mentioned, I'm an activist and an anthropologist, and I did research on the ZEDEs in Honduras roughly between 2014 and 2017 in Honduras. So this was a period of time when actual ZEDEs didn't exist yet, but I was looking at the process of how they were being implemented and the kinds of struggles that were emerging around the issues of sovereignty and citizenship and what those things mean. And I also did a longer study in the South in Zacate Grande, which at the time was where the government was saying the first ZEDE was going to be developed. We don't have information yet or any confirmation that there's actually a ZEDE that has been approved there. But I was looking at the question of land accumulation and the sort of 40-year history of how land dispossession has happened in that region, and then what that might mean in terms of what the implications of a ZEDE would be in that area, and then on a national level. So the first question that was asked of me, and I'll try to be brief, is why do I think Honduras was the country where this model is being developed, or the country that's sort of being used as a laboratory for this model. And I think Rebecca already touched on this. The coup in 2009 and the sort of constitutional rupture was absolutely instrumental in the process of developing the ZEDE model in Honduras. You had Honduras afterwards as being declared open for business and a process of rapid neoliberalization. And then at that same moment in time, you had sort of the convergence of different interests. You had people working within the Honduran government, such as Octavio Sanchez, who were interested in developing the special economic zone model that would go beyond the special economic zones that already existed in Honduras, under the logic that CAFTA had sort of equalized investment conditions throughout the region, and that Honduras needed to go beyond what already existed in order to attract capital. And then at the same time, you had these international networks of largely libertarians, groups such as the Startup Society Foundation, Free Private Cities, the ZEDEing Institute, that were looking for places where they could experiment with hyper-privatized, autonomous zones where they could develop and experiment with new governance models. Other reasons why I think Honduras was fertile ground for this process. After the coup, you have sort of the entrenchment of the narco state, increasing connections between the government and organized crime, widespread corruption, and a state apparatus very willing to violate democratic process and principles. And so that on the one hand was very instrumental in pushing through the ZEDE law, and at the same time, it created a justification, a supposed justification for the ZEDEs. The narrative of a failed state served to justify territorial privatization under the ZEDE model. And then finally, Honduras has one of the largest or one of the most unequal distributions of land in the continent. They had a failed agrarian reform, or at least a weak agrarian reform process. In the case of Zacate Grande, where I did my research, a failed agrarian reform. And so land is very concentrated and relatively easy to be bought up in large quantities for these zones. In terms of the concept of sovereignty, one of the things that my research talks about is that there's different ways of conceptualizing sovereignty. So the ZEDE promoters within the Honduran government are constantly arguing that the ZEDEs do not violate national sovereignty because the military still has jurisdiction in these zones. The people living in these zones still, have their personal identification issued by the federal government and these kinds of things. This is a reduced and pretty authoritarian concept of sovereignty that says that sovereignty resides in the state apparatus, essentially. And then in contrast, you have the concept of popular sovereignty, which is actually the concept of sovereignty that is protected in the Honduran constitution and is what Hondurans are constantly defending in the struggle against the ZEDEs, which is of course the right to actively participate in the ongoing construction of the nation. And it's directly connected to participatory and representative democracy and cannot be detached from that. So I argue that the ZEDEs are a project of what can be called flexibilización territorial, or territorial flexibilization, which delinks territorial sovereignty from the nation state, and it allows for the development of all these different types of forms of government, what is basically a decentralized colonization. So you don't have just one kind of zone that has a particular set of fiscal policies or rules. Instead, you have groups of investors that are given the space to establish their own forms of government and to experiment with those. So you have essentially privatization and outsourcing of governance. And what's key is that this can be done in most cases without congressional approval at all. So in the coastal regions, areas where there are low population density, the establishment of a ZEDE does not require any congressional approval. It only requires the approval of what's called the Committee for the Adoption of Best Practices, which we don't have time to go too much into now, but it was originally a 21-person committee, largely comprised of foreigners. 9 of those 21 people were from the US, large direct links to the former Reagan administration, international neoliberal institutions such as the Mont Pelerin Society and Cato Institute. And that group approves or disapproves of the ZEDEs. And then after the ZEDEs have been approved, they can expand and they can sort of reconfigure and reshape based on private property owners just deciding to incorporate their land into these ZEDEs. So really you have a model that allows for this kind of flexibility, that zones can grow and shrink and reshape and shift according to the desires of private property owners. So I think that there's a lot more to say about ZEDEs and popular sovereignty, and I'm sure Christopher will say a lot more, but I will leave it there. But basically what you have is this privatization and this outsourcing of governance in small territories within Honduran national territory.
Muchas gracias, Beth.
Thank you so much, Beth.
La verdad es que es muy
Well,
extenso y como
actually, it's something very interesting. And as you said, there's various interpretations of that. People that are being benefited by that project, such as investors, those are the ones that are building their own concepts or their own tailor-made definitions. Now I will introduce Christopher Castillo. He's a co-founder and uh, a coordinator of Alternative for Community and Environmental Vindication of Honduras. It's a space of coordination communities which defends common goods, nature, and fights against colonization to the Honduran people. Well, welcome, Christopher. Thank you so much for participating in this case. We would like to ask you the same question. We would like to count with your experience and your knowledge of the country, since you are an environmental activist in the country. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to PBI and to LASC for your invitation. It's important that we work in justice, not only in inverted commas legal justice, but also in justice for the people. We need to be able to denounce what is going on in our world, in our regions, and we need to build solutions all together to fight these projects of colonization, such as the one of ZEDEs in Honduras. I would like to start by saying that, as Beth said, this project had the name of ZEEs, special zones for developments. They wanted to expropriate land, and this was after a coup, and they were abiding by a law that has allowed people in Honduras to access public justice. This has prevented the the Honduran people to have a place where they can access uh, the rules. On another note, on another note, people in the administration have prevented the Honduran people from fighting against these projects of colonization. In 2019, there's also been a build-up and militarization of the country, and uh, alongside the police has impeded locals to fight against privatizations. Why am I mentioning this? Well, because all these laws that I mentioned are somehow connected to reinforcing projects that, in the case of Honduras, are projects of generating energy and projects about national sovereignty. In the case of the ZEDEs, which got their name in 2013, and were created by Paul Romer. And in fact, Paul Romer uh, is now disconnected from the project because he doesn't feel like it is what it was to be back in the day. I'm not saying it's right, but uh, even for those people who wanted to do something illegal, they feel like it's worse than it was to be. I'll talk about participation of banks that announced an investment, and that investment was withdrawn, but they invested in other projects such as privatization of water. We also have information about a loan from the Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. It's not the same as ZEDE as a model city, and they had a project with a national park rather, that would displace a lot of communities. That would undermine projects to fight against this colonization. There was also a project that dried up um, a river. ZEDEs are unconstitutional, and when we say that, we are referring to changes uh, to the constitution of the republic that were made to put this program into place. Honduras is divided in 18 departments and 2098 municipalities and villages within those municipalities. Those municipalities are subject to growth. However, the constitution was changed, and cities are now a new territorial division. This is an offense and a blow for the Honduran people. The justice system was also changed. Honduras has reached 19% of impunity. The Latin American Tribunal Court of Human Rights created a new subdivision to deal with issues in Honduras. An article mentions uh, not only is there are the rules to be changed, but uh, the cities will also be able to judge issues in Honduras, and this is also an offense and distorts the concept of justice. They also made another change to the constitution, adding cities to the administrative system that's also against the constitution to do that. They did that by special decree, and they adopted special practices for that. In 2013, that was signed by four magistrates, such as Ricardo Maduro, who was born in Panama, but he made some special arrangements to be recognized as a Honduran citizen. Three more people um, were mentioned in the list of possible people to be extradited by offenses related to the traffic of drugs. All those people have worked uh, as advocates for the project of the ZEDEs. This resulted in the decree I'm talking about. Please let me know if I'm going over time. Your cities are not only private cities, they're not only urban areas of development. In the second article of the organic law, 8 types of cities are mentioned. Mm, mm, Centers for mining exploitation and touristic areas are mentioned, and even international legal systems. Agro-industrial zones are mentioned as well. We will talk about those uh, later on, and the same article is mentioned. I will sum it up because I don't have much time, but I will say that to sum up, the organic law places cities as a state within the country of Honduras. However, they mention they have the same attributions as a municipality, and this confirms the constitution change of Article 64. Those changes led to the creation of the cities, and since it's a state within another state, they will be able to have the components that states have. Through Article 28, expropriation of territories of Honduras is legalized. They would also have their special legal power and power to appoint judges. Foreign judges could be appointed, and the executive power, according to Article 12 of the law, would have all the power and would be able to appoint a president within the ZEDE. So the relationship between ZEDEs and state is a relationship of a country with another country. We are denouncing this uh, because in a future, as soon as the ZEDEs gain more territory, they could demand independence from the Honduran territory. That happened also in the Western Balkans. That started as operation linked to neocolonialism, but now independence is being demanded. 10 departments of the 18 departments of Honduras are being targeted as areas for ZEDEs. They want to set up cities in all the 7 departments that have access to the sea. This is a big percentage of the national territory. They also represent the coastline, but also the direct effects on 3 million people. They're not content with coastal areas, but they also want to set up ZEDEs in the central part of the country. This could be a paradise geographically, not politically speaking. Constitution of the Republic, treaties ratified by Honduras, and also special laws derived from the Constitution will be applied in the ZEDEs, while the cities don't have their own laws. When the ZEDE of Prospera has published a few documents and a huge number of pages of their own legislation, that means the national law has no place in Prospera. An example of that is that they will have a special currency within Prospera, independent from the Honduran currency. This will be a cryptocurrency that turns its back to the economic system and to the Bank of Honduras. And this embraces colonialism, undermines sovereignty, and also is headed to this process of independentism that I'm talking about. I'll also talk about the bet by the libertarians that want the Honduran state to disappear, and that's a vision, a very ample vision. On the one, this is unacceptable from a anti-capitalist and anti-colonialist point of view. We also want to understand how these systems of domination, such as racism and patriarchy, can apply to that. I'm mentioning this connected to the situation with Barbara Cole in Switzerland. And in the case of Prospera, to take part of on the system, each person will have a vote as long as they have, well, rather according to how much land they possess. So the more area an inhabitant possesses, the more legal power they will have. So society is being classified according to their possessions and their capital. I will stop now. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Christopher. I found that very interesting and very informative on the legal parts of the ZEDEs, and thank you for broadening our vision. As you said, it's a state within another state. Now, I would like to give the floor to Beth, and I would like you to speak to us about what are the benefits of the ZEDEs for Honduran people. The last government, they had a campaign to believe in the ZEDEs. They said they will bring a lot of employment to the country. So my question is, do ZEDEs really have a benefit for Honduran people that do not reside in the cities? And in that case, what would the requirements for people to be a resident of those cities?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sorry, 1 second. So as Christopher was saying earlier, and as I was mentioning, one thing that's important to remember is that the ZEDE law allows for groups of investors to create completely different models in different places. And so on the one hand, you'll have the ZEDE Orquídea in Choluteca, which is much more industrial and potentially more labor intensive. And then on the other hand, you'll have Prospera in Roatan, which is a very different kind of project, and it sort of much more embodies the kind of libertarian and crypto interests behind the ZEDE model. it's currently hiring people in construction and people as cooks in restaurants or in different areas of the ZEDE, but likely to be much less labor intensive than a more industrial zone. So for example, the Prospera model is likely to be more based in real estate markets and speculation. And then again, the attracting of foreigners and people from the outside, in particular, people who are considered digital nomads, mobile tech workers who can work from anywhere in the world, who are looking for a beautiful place in the Caribbean to go and live and to run their businesses within this kind of libertarian and free market framework. And again, the sort of speculative market of cryptocurrency and so forth. But even given that, within whatever jobs might be created within these zones, I think it's important to ask, could they have been created under another model as well? And then also the issue of who is going to have access to these zones. So it's very clear that access to resident status within these zones is exclusive, and it's based on a few things. So the first of which, so again, actually, I'm going to be speaking about the Prospera ZEDE as an example, because again, each zone will have its own policies around these things. But in the Prospera ZEDE, in order to become a legally recognized resident of the zone and therefore to have a particular role or particular rights within the zone, which I think we'll talk about those and what those look like at a later point. One has to be approved by a private corporation, which is the general service provider. So both the Prospera ZEDE and the Morazan ZEDE have contracted a private entity to be the general service provider, and that entity gets to approve new residents. And this is largely under their discretion. So the language within the Prospera Charter talks about being able to approve residents based on things like the reputation and the harmony of the Prospera ZEDE, doing criminal background checks on people and these things. So there's no legal system in place that says that anyone who meets certain requirements can become a resident. Instead, it's up to the discretion of this private entity. And then after that point, there's a series of fees that a person needs to be able to pay to have resident status within the zone. So there's, for Honduran citizens, it's $260 fee per year. It's an additional, I think it's $1,300 for a foreigner. It's an additional $130 to be able to access the digital governance platform for Prospera. And then there's an additional required insurance that each resident needs to purchase for a maximum of $260. So these are annual fees, and it sort of amounts to what I call citizenship by membership or by subscription. And they are exclusionary to people who don't have the means to pay them. There's also an agreement of coexistence within the Prospera model, and this is something that's encouraged within the ZEDE law, but it's not required. And within the agreement of coexistence, it says that residents must commit to financial self-responsibility without depending on any subsidies from the Prospera government. So again, this creates a class division in who has access to this kind of status within the zone. So it could be the case that some Honduran professionals of a particular class status will have access to resident status within the zones, but that it is likely to be highly exclusionary. And I think what's likely to happen is that there will be people employed within the zones who don't have any democratic rights within those zones. I can say more about what the system of government itself looks like, but I think that was designated for another question. So I will leave it there for now.
Muchas gracias, Beth.
Thank you very much, Beth.
Entonces, si podemos ver lo que es la inversión sería.
Well, so investment
Muy pocos trabajos, nada más sería como
won't really create much
puede
jobs, many
construir
jobs
su
rather,
vida o ya una vez que
and
tienen todo preparado, no
they would
necesitarían
really entail construction of the ZEDEs. And once they're
porque
built,
en realidad el
they
país
wouldn't
no
need any
tendría ningún
more
beneficio porque no
jobs.
tendría ningún régimen fiscal, o sea, no
The
estarían
country wouldn't have any further
recibiendo
benefits because they wouldn't have any
o lo
additional
que es
economic benefits.
taxes. Perdón, se me olvidó a decirlo en español. Entonces, Christopher, me
No money
gustaría
would be
que
coming in from
nos hablaras un
taxes.
poco más
So, Christopher,
acerca de
we would
esto.
like you
Algunos
to talk
empresarios y
to us
economistas del
a bit
país
about that, because
consideran
some
necesario que
entrepreneurs
estas
or
ciudades
economists from the
tengan una
country
administración independiente
think
debido
those
a que el
cities
gobierno de
should have an
Honduras
independent administration.
tiene mucha corrupción
This is
y
because the
deficiencias en la
government
administración.
of
Entonces, me gustaría saber
Honduras has a lot of
cuáles son los riesgos
corruption
que tú
and
ves si
does
estas
not
zonas
work
prescinden del
in a
código penal
very
hondureño y
efficient
cuentan
way.
con sus propias
So,
leyes,
what do you
sistema
think about
judicial, sistema
those
penitenciario y régimen fiscal.
cities having their own police, their own legal system, and their own tax system? Well, to begin with, I will start by saying ZEDEs, apart from the analysis of the threats that they constitute, is a project that was rejected by the Honduran government. It was never approved in the Congress. And the we advocate for the non-existence of this project. This entrepreneurial system wants to generate benefits from various sources, but it's something that shouldn't exist in any country. But we're talking about Honduras right now. ZEDEs would use a common law system which turns its back from to the Honduran system, and Orquídea, a ZEDE, published last year their labor code, and that turns its back to the International Labor Organization, and it also turns its back to uh, Honduras, people from Honduras in matters of employment. They have a capitalist approach to many areas of the economy, and they offer careers that do not exist at a national level. So, what are they referring to when they talk about them? To fight while those cities were being condemned in different points of Honduras, uh, they would still be built at the same time. There's a certain people that have an interest on a certain types of provisions being undermined. An example is extradition. This is being treated differently because the the corrupt system of Honduras uh, wants to see the cities as an opportunity. There's also a problem with expropriation. We cannot uh, build a city if a territory is not expropriated. Nobody wants to give their territory up. Then, when investors talk about demands to the um, state system, no one's going to give any territory up. A startup uh, published 7 documents of their legal establishments, including their own energy company, their own water company, and this is very concerning. This happened in November 2021, and the government of Choloma Cortés declared that the municipality was ZEDE free. However, the city is still being built, and the former mayor was also involved in corruption scandals, and he is also linked to expropriation and to business with a famous Honduran drug trafficker. So we need to keep two things in mind. Cities will have their own laws to break free from Honduras, and also, even if they were within Honduras, they shouldn't exist because the Honduran state has been conditioned to favor private investors. Last year, a new criminal code has been published, and that undermines people's rights. And even if we had the national law, we wouldn't be well off either. However, if someone had a conflict with someone, they would abide by common law. One of the two experts of common law in the country works for ZEDEing Mariposa. So I could go on all day talking about this. I won't be long, but I will just talk about them having been backed by the law. So we will talk about this later on. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Christopher.
Well, thank you so much, Christopher.
La verdad que sí tienes,
Well, in
toda la
fact,
razón
you
en
are
ese
right
punto. También
in
he
regards
escuchado
to that.
personas
I'd also heard
que
people
dicen los
talking
derechos de la
about
mujer y de los niños
women's rights
pues
and
dan mucha
children's rights,
fuerza a
and
que sea
those
Honduras
people
como
talk
un
about
asilo para trata
Honduras
de personas, por
being
ejemplo, o se podría
a
calificar
place where
estas zonas de las sedes como en paraísos
illegal
fiscales porque
activities
tendrán su
are
propio régimen fiscal,
allowed.
ellos tendrán
They
su
would have their
propio código
own
penal, etcétera.
um,
Ahora me gustaría
criminal law code.
saber si alguien de
And
ustedes
now I
que
would
nos
like
está
to
escuchando
know if
tiene
someone
preguntas, pueden hacerlas
in
en
the
este
public,
momento.
someone that's listening to us in the
Mientras le doy
audience,
la palabra a
has
Beth,
any questions for us.
me gustaría
And
que
then
nos
I will
ilustraras un poco
give
más
the
de lo
floor
que
to
es
Beth. Uh,
la
we would like
administración de lo que es
to talk
Próspera,
about a little bit
la
more
ciudad de
about
Honduras,
administration
que ha
of
estado muy
Prospera,
presente y que has
the
estado
city you've been in contact with the most. Thank you.
Sure, I can say a little bit more about, so I think one of the big controversies in Honduras when it came to light in the public that the tourism project that was happening near Crawfish Rock in Roatan was in fact a ZEDE, and then all of a sudden there was information available about the Prospera ZEDE. I remember there was a debate on TV in which there were representatives from Prospera, who were arguing that this is just another municipal government, that this is just another space for a democratic municipal government, and that people, that this whole theory of privatization of governance and so forth was incorrect. But if you actually look at the charter of Prospera and some of their legal code, as Christopher was mentioning, they have already established an extensive legal code for the zone. You get a better sense of what they actually mean. And so what Prospera has developed is what they call a mixed system. And it's a system that incorporates some elements of democracy, but essentially neutralizes those elements so that they can't derail or override what is the vision of what is called the ZEDEs organizer and promoter. In this case, it's a company called Prospera LLC, which is based in the United States. And so this model essentially neutralizes the democratic elements within it so that they can't override the master plan of the ZEDE, they can't override the vision of the ZEDE's private founders. So in the Prospera ZEDE, you have the technical secretary, which is required within the ZEDE law, and it's the one position within the zone that has to be a Honduran citizen. And it, of course, I think Christopher mentioned this, but it's good to be reminded that over the technical secretary, the CAMP, the Committee for the Adoption of Best Practices, which is this committee that was originally 21 people. It's unclear, there isn't public information available right now as to who currently sits on this committee or who sat on the committee when these ZEDEs were approved, but they have direct oversight over the technical secretary. So they can actually remove that person. They can replace that person with somebody else if they don't approve of the way that they're acting and so forth. And so then Prospera also has what's called a council of trustees, and that's comprised of 8 people. And so this would essentially be the equivalent of a legislative branch. But this council of trustees, you have 4 of the 8 people that are handpicked by Prospera LLC, the organizer and promoter company of the ZEDE. And of the 4 that are remaining, at least in this point in time, in the ZEDE, 2 of those are elected by the body of residents, so people who have had the privilege to receive resident status within the ZEDE, and then the other 2 of those 4 are elected specifically by landowners within the zone. And as Christopher was saying, those votes are delegated in direct proportion to squared meters of land that a person owns. So you have a model in which they're basically codifying this idea that property should equal greater rights. Greater ownership of property should equal greater rights within the zone. And it's interesting because this actually seems to violate Article 9 of the ZEDE law itself, which says that all people in the ZEDE should have equal rights within the zone. And so you have this model that was developed by Prospera, and something very, very similar has been adopted by Morazan, and can potentially be adopted by other zones. I think the other really central and important thing about the Prospera model is their model of decentralized regulation. So normally in a democratic system, the regulations on industry and so forth would be decided through a democratic process and et cetera. And what Prospera does is it gives investors options between different regulatory frameworks. So they can choose to adopt the regulatory framework of any of 20 countries that are members of the OECD, or any sub-jurisdiction within any of those countries. And another option that this system provides to investors is to basically write their own regulatory framework and propose it to the Prospera Council. And if that framework is approved, then it becomes part of a menu. It becomes an option on a menu that other investors and other industry people can choose from. So within one jurisdiction, you will have multiple companies, even within the same industry, potentially operating under completely different regulatory frameworks. And then the onus to enforce those regulations, which of course are multiple, is placed on the residents themselves. So any resident has the right to sue a person or a company for violating whichever regulatory framework they're following. But at the same time, it places that responsibility on the residents. So you really have this recipe for kind of chaos in terms of regulations, and very difficult to sort of ensure or protect the commons in any way under that model. So those were just some of the things that I wanted to highlight about the kinds of models that are being developed under the ZEDE law that can be replicated and of course expanded upon. Yeah, to sort of speak against this idea that these are just democratic municipal governments under another name.
Muchas gracias, Beth, por
Thank you very
informarnos.
much, Beth.
La administración de Próspera, de la sede Próspera.
Thank you for the information about the Prospera ZEDE. We have some questions from the audience. One of them says, what is the visa or the mobility situation in the rest of Honduras for foreigners residing in a ZEDE city? could they move freely around the country?
Christopher, I don't know if you want to answer that. My
Yo,
understanding. Go
ah,
ahead.
ok, bueno, sí, bueno, las personas
Well, yes. People with an Honduran ID won't have a direct entrance to the cities. They have their own system of identification and of entrance into the cities. So cities, um, because of that and because of the organic law and the stances of the city, won't have won't grant entrance to anyone that doesn't meet the requirements. Nobody that is not part of the project will be able to enter. The exception is someone that built a house to, as an example that the idea could work, but in reality, uh, they don't grant access to anyone. They want to undermine traditional governments and to establish a state within another state. They also want to build a big wall around the cities. None of the cities have a direct entrance. And in the future, that would still not happen. There will still be restrictions for people that want to go in. In the case of Morazan, which is the more open, they still have their own police. In case that a person commits an offense within the city, they will have to be prosecuted uh, in the framework of common law. So uh, money laundering, uh, terrorism, drug trafficking, uh, child pornography, and organized crime will be permitted. And those offenses uh, are some offenses some members of the latest government have been accused of. You talked about what it means for rights, for women's rights, and the strengthening of the laws about maternity wants to be put in place in Mariposa. I won't be long about this, but what they really want is illegal activities such as trafficking of underage people being allowed in the cities. The technical secretary of the
Christopher, sí, ahora me
well,
gustaría saber
Christopher, yes.
si los residentes de sedes
Sorry to interrupt you. I
de
would
los
like to
residentes de
know
sedes
if the
podrían
residents
movilizarse
of the ZD
al
cities
resto del país.
could move freely without
¿Están ellos
within
protegidos?
the rest of the country. Oh, yes, absolutely. They will be able to do so. They do it all the time. But people from the outside that want to go in will face a series of restrictions. Even in Article 20 of the Organic Law, it states that the Honduran government doesn't grant any restriction to people to move freely. So that's one of the elements why this is a tax haven. It works like that in terms of income, but also uh, the ZEDEs will be an international company. In the ZEDEs, an international company would manage the matters of taxation, population, and laws from the rest of Honduras won't have any
Gracias,
value
Christopher.
within the cities because they will have their own
Otra
system.
pregunta del
Thank you,
público
Christopher. We
pregunta qué
have
papel
another
juega
question from
todo
the
eso.
audience. They want to know what is the role of Canada in all this?
Algo, Beth,
Uh, do you know anything about this, Beth?
I'm not sure specifically the role of Canada in the ZEDEs. Maybe Christopher knows more. The Canadian government in general has supported the post-coup governments, the post-coup regimes in Honduras, signing a bilateral trade agreement, for example, after the coup in 2009 and so forth. So there's that sort of greater role in terms of political support and partnership with the Juan Orlando Hernandez and the Pepe Lobo governments. I'm not sure, Christopher, if you know anything more specifically about Canada's role within the ZEDEs.
Sí, durante el establecimiento.
Yes, during establishing of the special economic zones in Honduras, the Canadian government had representation and it invested in Honduras. However, there were pressure from the outside, and the Canadian government withdrew their participation. And recently, when international investment was opened again, they didn't act. However, lately they've been in touch with the government of Canada. Ties have been established with Canada for people to know what's going on. This contrasts with what's going on in the United States. One of the secretaries of wants to the law to be overridden because there's some issues that of illegality. However, I don't know about any pronunciation of the Canadian government regarding ZEDEs.
There's another potentially related question in the chat about what are the chances of banning the ZEDEs that have already been implemented.
Well, yes.
Just one thing to add to that is the sort of importance of the binational investor protection agreements, and specifically that with the US. And so regardless of what happens within the Honduran government in regards to the ZEDEs that already exist, there have already been statements made by Prospera's administration and by Morazan's administration insinuating intent to sue, either for investment that's already been made in the ZEDEs or for future profits using these bilateral agreements. So that is, of course, another issue of national sovereignty and violation of national sovereignty that doesn't depend specifically on the ZEDE law, but that has already been in place through these agreements.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much. And I would like to conclude by knowing the conclusion. What do you think about? Well, I think it's clear, but do you have anything else to add, or do you want to elaborate on anything that you think the audience should know? If you want to do so, you have 5 minutes each right now. Beth, you can start. And would you like to share anything that you wanted to say?
Tienes la palabra, Beth.
I give the floor to you.
I'm not sure exactly how I would like to close. One thing that I do think is important to stress when talking about the ZEDEs, and Christopher did talk about this as well, is the diversity of these kinds of zones that can exist. So you have sort of like the more traditional extractive interests that can use these zones as mining zones. They can use them for energy production and these kinds of extractive industries. There's real estate and urban development interests, there's tourism development interests, and so forth. I think one of the global drivers behind this model that we can't forget about and that we need to understand more is the expansion of blockchain ecosystems and decentralized finance markets, or markets that are based in decentralized finance, so aka different kinds of cryptocurrencies. I think that there is a direct relationship between this push or this need by both libertarian organizations, but also the crypto world and the blockchain world to access this kind of territorial autonomy, or this kind of jurisdictional autonomy, in order to expand the ecosystems of those economies. And sort of one of the end goals of this is to replace the regulated and centralized global financial system with a decentralized finance. And so I think that Honduras is sort of ground zero for this kind of model, but there's interest in implementing it all over the world. In Nevada, in the US, there was recently legislation proposed to create what were called innovation zones. And the company Blockchain LLC was largely behind this proposal, and the proposal has since been eliminated. But we're seeing the same kind of model or similar model as what's being implemented in Honduras pop up all over the world. And so I think that these are some of the driving forces behind it that we need to be looking at, in addition to the sort of extractive and other kinds of neo-colonizing interests in Honduras. So I'll close with that. And again, yeah, thank you so much for having me, for creating this space. And I hope that we can continue the conversation.
Muchas gracias, Beth, por tu
Thank you so
participación.
much, Beth, for your participation and with sharing your experience in Honduras with us. Christopher, you also have 5 minutes to conclude. Is there anything you want to share with your audience? I would like to invite you to understand that this is not only an issue of Honduras, this is an issue that concerns every country. The prosperous city also announced the opening of new projects in third countries. Then we need to talk about justice of the peoples in plural. There's mechanisms of colonial occupation that have been going on. You can find information about this online, and there's some projects that wants to the state of Honduras to disappear, but also our peoples, and these projects take advantage of the corruption of the governments to intervene in several territories. And so we need to talk about activism from several points of view, and in Honduras this has been crystallized in the form of a national movement against ZEDEs and the people that protest against ZEDEs and campaign for movements against the ZEDEs. We are committed to keeping our territorial integrity. You can find us on social media, and there you could find extra information about what we do. Thank you very much for your invite. Well, thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you. Thanks to you, to Beth, and to the organizations that have supported us. I would like to conclude by appreciating everyone logging in and sharing their information about the topic. I think there's some hope in this situation. The government by Xiomara Castro designated a committee to fight the ZEDEs, and a person who has a lot of experience was appointed to conduct the issue. And this is a sign of relief, because we see the governments that want to take action against this. This contrasts with what last government did. So I would like to thank everyone, to Chris, my information you gave to us, same to Beth. Thanks so much for your concern about our country. Thank you to LASC, and thanks to PBI Ireland, thanks to Evan for participation in this event. So I'll give now the floor to Narela, the coordinator of LASC. So thanks so much, Rebecca, and thanks so much, Christopher and Beth, for this magnificent explanation about the issues that are going on. It has been very enriching, and as the organizer of the events, I would like to say it has been an honor uh, to have you, and thanks so much also to Rebecca to bring this topic to the table, and thanks for your activism as well. And I would like to give thanks to our interpreters that have their camera off right now. But thanks so much to Josue and to Elena to be here for us. Uh, and to make possible people that wanted to listen to a webinar in English to do it, and same with Spanish, and to make communication possible. I think that helps a lot to keep the conversation going and to build bridges between Latin America and Ireland. Thanks so much for participating. I know it's quite late, at least here in Ireland. So thanks so much to everyone. I will let you know we are going to follow through with this, and that we will send you a document, form of feedback that you can fill out so we can learn about these events, learn how to get better, and how to prove the government of Ireland that this project is important and these issues need to be uh, talked about. So we hope that this conversation is still going, and the new government brings new options to fight these issues and to bring the best to for the Honduran society. Thanks so much to everybody, and you can log out if you want now. Thank you so much.